Welcome to the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here in the University of Nottingham. We live in a world of religious diversity, and that diversity is seen by some as a great opportunity and by others as a source of unending conflict. Professor Philip Goodchild has been reflecting on this problem for many years, and he is with me today to discuss the significance of religious diversity and why it's useful to study it. Philip.
Yes, when we look at the main religions in the world, we might notice all sorts of superficial resemblances. So, for example, religions normally involve certain kinds of worship directed to invisible beings. They normally involve certain communities that identify together and have a set way of life. They involve different ethics and laws and regulations. They involve different teachings and a different sense of things that are sacred. So we might say religions seem quite similar, and that's why we call them religions. If you look a little bit more closely, it's not so obvious that someone engaged in worship, for example, by chanting Hare Krishna, is doing exactly the same thing as a Muslim at daily prayers, or a Catholic saying the daily office, or an evangelical Christian having a conversation with Jesus in their heads. So there's a range of different religious practices that are shaped by different thought worlds that belong to the different religious traditions. And then on this basis you might say that religious diversity is quite radical. Religions are different things. They have different aims, different intentions. If you belong to one, you do something entirely different to belonging to another. That would then raise a question, well, why think about religious diversity at all? Can't you simply ignore it? I think there is a relevant question. Perhaps it's a philosophical question, but it comes down to a certain similarity in why people are religious. People are religious because that's the way it's always been done, or that's the way they identify with their group, or that's because of the authority of certain scriptures, or it might be because they have powerful religious experiences, or they interpret their whole life through the story and framework provided by their religion. Now, these reasons for being religious in themselves are quite similar, and they're equally as strong as each other. So just as a Christian might feel entirely warranted in seeing the world from a Christian perspective and practicing a Christian faith, so might a Buddhist feel entirely warranted in seeing the world from a Buddhist perspective and living out a Buddhist life. And that raises the question, well, which is better? Which is right? Which would bring a true salvation? And is there any degree of error or inadequacy involved in some religious life, some religious practices?
You've just there given yourself about half a dozen questions. Would you like to go on further and try and answer some of those questions?
Yes. There are different... I suppose the question I'm raising is, can all religions be true? And do all religions bring salvation? And there are perhaps four main approaches to this, three of which are well known, another which less so. One approach is to think, it just so happens that I am right, that my sources of evidence, the reasons for my belief, are so convincing that I know that other people, when they claim the same kind of thing, their reasons can't be quite as strong as mine. They must be deluded. So one approach is to say, actually, I happen to be right, and these other people happen to be wrong. Many people take this point of view, and many of them are no doubt wrong, because their religious beliefs conflict with others who take this point of view. So it's not a certain way of achieving truth.
That actually is that's the classic way that diversity leads to conflict.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it need not be explicit conflict, but it might be if you're trying to persuade others to join you, or you feel that the others more likely are a threat to your own beliefs, then you'll fight for them.
Okay. The second
approach starts from this same conviction that my point of view is the best one. The reasons that I have for holding my belief are the strongest, and the belief system that I have is the wisest and richest and fullest and brings about the fullest salvation. But then you might look at other faiths and say, there are all sorts of similarities. These people involved in another faith do think rather like me. They have the same kinds of moral values as me. They have the same sense of what's important. And you might think that insofar as what they say and how they live corresponds to how we know we should speak and live, then they must be right too, to that extent. Perhaps they don't have the fullest picture. Only we have the fullest picture, but other religious paths are the route to leading a good life, to leading the right life very often. And so you can be quite inclusive and have a respect for all sorts of religious practices where you like them, where you agree with them, even if the name of the grouping and the name of the divine being worshipped is different.
So we could characterize that as sort of what in Christian terms would be the baptism of desire solution.
Yes.
Insofar as they can and insofar as they're able, they're getting there, and therefore, in a sense, they will be okay.
Yes, and some Christians would imagine that people of other faiths, if they met Christ, would find that they had been following Christ, or what Christ is as the ultimate truth, without knowing the name, and immediately acknowledge him.
So the older jargon would be baptism of desire, the more modern jargon would be the anonymous Christian route.
Yes.
Okay, the third approach.
The third approach is to observe from the plurality of faiths the commitment that they inspire, the extent of moral devotion, the kind of moral qualities that emerge, and think there are people of other faiths whom I respect at least as much as people in my faith. In fact, some of them in some aspects more so. And since these other faiths are ways in which people lead transformed lives, and transformed lives that are manifestly good, you could easily conclude that these other faiths must therefore be as valid as my own. Now, they might not seem a live option for me, because I can only live as I've known it, as I've known the people around me to lead their lives. So you might not want to change your own faith, but seeing how other people live, you could take this, I suppose it's called a pluralist attitude, and say there are many ways, and they all lead to the truth in the end. They just grasp different aspects of it and emphasize different points.
This is the classic position of John Hick.
Yes.
And we can characterize it as one mountain, many paths to the summit.
Yes, something like that.
Okay, you said that they were the three most known, and certainly I think I would agree they are the most known. But you also said there was a fourth way.
There's a fourth way, which is to say, if many people hold these religious beliefs vehemently, and many of them are wrong, then perhaps all religions are deeply ambivalent, and they may produce good qualities in people, good ways of life, but they could also be misleading. And that raises the question, to what extent is my own faith partial? To what extent is my own faith incomplete or hasn't grasped the fullness of the revelation that it could have grasped or is available? And this is a kind of position of spiritual humility, you could say, and to think that there are other people in the world who are a little wiser than I am, and not all of them belong to my faith tradition. I've got something to learn from some of these other people. And when I look at them, I might feel quite ambivalent about them. There might be certain aspects of them I respect, but certain other aspects I say, oh no, I don't want anything to do with that. And so I'm a little bit suspicious of them. But one could take as a starting point the notion that there are people with much profounder, wiser insights into life and how it should be lived and how it can be transformed than I have. So what can I learn from them? And this position is not a matter of saying my way is best or all ways are equal, because some ways can still be a lot better than others, and everything can still be quite ambivalent, really. But how can you learn from the insights of people who have quite different traditions what makes a rounded spiritual life?
Could we characterize this as receptive humility?
Yes, that would be a good phrase.
I work as a Christian theologian. I feel that over every theologian's head should be a wagging finger with 3 words: Deus semper maior, God is always greater. To a certain extent, your fourth way is the ultimate is always greater.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have an effect on what we mean by truth? Because we tend to think of truth either as a quality of propositions, you can tick it yes or no, or else we tend to think of truth as some sort of possession. But if one really absorbs the idea that the ultimate is always greater, or Deus semper maior, then in a sense truth becomes, in personal terms, and not something one possesses, but that which one is perpetually seeking. It becomes in one's personal life an eschatological event. It's not something I have, it's something I'm searching. Would that be?
Yes, certainly, and even going a little bit beyond that, I think truth is not only something that one is continually seeking, but sometimes one finds a little bit of it. And by that, I mean you have an insight, or to recognize anything as truth, there's this, even if it's a proposition, you say, yes, it's true, I see now, I see why, I see that's the case. And there's this moment of recognition. We normally think of truth then as a property of the mind or a property of propositions. But that turns upside down the real situation. When you recognize something as true, it's more that your mind is possessed by truth for a moment rather than your mind possessing the truth. And this fits with what you were saying about God is always greater. Truth is always greater than our minds. We have it wrong, the wrong attitude if we think of it something we can gather together like our money, our wealth. There might be occasions in life when truth possesses us to a greater or lesser extent, and to live a life which is open to truth in that respect is part of this fourth alternative.
Professor Philip Goodchild, thank you.